welcome to the Basketball Parents Journey podcast, where we capture parents' stories about their journey so far and what has worked and not worked for them. Listen as parents share their wisdom across a wide spectrum of experience from beginners to college athletes and their recommendations for you as your player embarks on the next stage of their basketball journey from beginner to high school player and beyond. Hey, Eric.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you for your flexibility. And sorry I stood you up last time.
That's right. There's a whole lot going on around the world. I know how it goes.
So my name's Eric. I've got two kids, Abby, who is 14, and Colin, who's 11. So both middle school students, 8th and 6th grade, and they love basketball.
Awesome. And kind of catch me up on your background with basketball first. Far back do you want to go? Like, did you play? And you're now coaching, I know, but
Yeah. So I mean, I played when I was younger. I played through middle school and high school, and then intramurals through college. So post that, play pickup. I mean, I'm still members at the Works up here in Somersworth, and play pickup games in the evenings and so forth. So love basketball, but I never played college. Probably wasn't good enough, but so that's sort of in a nutshell my background in terms of playing. But I guess coming out of COVID, so in schools, as you're aware, everything shut down for a while. I mean, my kids' school, they didn't have a whole basketball season in what would have been 2021 or 2019, 2020 season, or whichever it was. I get confused. It feels so long ago because Abby's now in 8th grade and she was in 5th grade when everything shut down. So coming out of that, like 5th, 6th grade, she didn't play any basketball. They didn't have basketball to play. So she started becoming interested in it into 7th grade. So last year, and in school, it was kind of interesting that, no one at that point had played because they didn't have basketball. Right. So, we had a couple girls that played, like in 5th grade, but that was it. So it was kind of like starting with a whole new team. And, for me, how it started in terms of coaching was conversation at a cross country meet that we don't think we're going to have a girls basketball team this year because we don't have anyone to coach it. So I just put my hand up and said, well, the girls want to play, so I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So for me personally, it was a lot of trying to recall what I did back in school, but I found that was really, really difficult because when I think back to 20 years ago, everybody that I played with knew basketball. I mean, when you get to the high school level, like you either know something or you're not there, as opposed to starting with kids that have no idea how to dribble or shoot a jump shot or even necessarily what's a foul shot, So I had to totally reset my own thinking in terms of the level of, player that we're working with. And so I read books and watched a lot of YouTube, and that was my first year coaching last year. Okay. I very quickly realized how much I didn't know, which sort of through, I guess, friends, my son became familiar with Hoops Lab and play practice and your FIBA 3-on-3, games and tournaments that you're playing. So he got involved in that a little bit, but, he last year, he wasn't able to play, even try out for basketball. They just sort of said, well, 5th grade's not going to happen. So he was bummed. They did an intramural thing for him, but it wasn't until really playing with you guys over the summer that he got much exposure to basketball, but that also gave me a little bit of exposure. So when we started coming into this basketball season, I thought I actually need to, educate myself a little bit more, which was when I first reached out to you in terms of, do you do anything like coaching the coach? Help me learn how to be a better coach.
Right.
So, I mean, that's sort of where I started this year. And that morphed into, oh, by the way, we could actually bring the whole team in for a month ahead of the season and do some workouts. And I mean, for me as a coach, that was super valuable because I got to see, you, and then, with our girls team, and then, my son and one of his friends came to those practices because they have to get tagged along with older sisters. And they all of a sudden said, hey, why can't we do this with our team? So then all of a sudden we threw it together with the school's JV team with Coach Kelly. So that's sort of where we started.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I appreciate hearing that whole overview of the timeline. So I like to always go back with, you had your own experience playing in high school and so forth, and you said middle school as well. But what was kind of the start point for Abby and Colin, starting to play, back before Abby was in 5th grade, I guess, when she was already into it a little bit. What was their start point?
I mean, truly, like for Abby, it was 7th grade, coming out of COVID, not having been able to do anything. And they wanted, she had a group of friends that all played basketball. And she said, well, I've never played team sports. I mean, she was a girl that played soccer for like 2 games and was like, I'm not that competitive. I don't think I want to do this, and she got dragged along by some friends that were interested in it. And lo and behold, she loved being part of a team. And I think what she loved about basketball was, as compared to soccer, at least at a young age, I mean, they talk about it like, cats chasing a ball of yarn, right? Like it's sort of chaos out there on the field. But like on the court, even though she wasn't experienced, she could see that there's a lot more to this than just chasing a ball and trying to put it in the hoop. So like one of my favorite quotes from her this year was a game that I don't think she took one shot, but she must have had, a dozen assists. And she's like, I don't even care if I shoot the ball. I like moving the ball. And she liked being part of, everything that was going on. She didn't need to be the person that was like, standing on the podium at the end as the high scorer. Sure. So, I mean, for her, it was just a group of friends that dragged her along. Okay. For my son is similar, is playing ball at recess. And, once he had an opportunity to start playing for a team and, like he's played travel baseball for years. We've never even looked at basketball. I mean, as a parent, you start trying to think like, how much do I have capacity to do? Like we're doing baseball and we've got school stuff and, just all these things going on. Now, of course, he wants to try to find a basketball league to play in because I think it's that learning curve. It's exciting while you're learning. And then as opposed to playing travel baseball since he was 9, I guess 8 technically for a 9U team, he's kind of said, well, I know everything. It's like, well, that's not true, but the progression is slower now. Like you have to work harder for it. Whereas basketball, he's like every pickup game, he feels like I've learned something new or this and that.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, that's long.
I didn't realize that Abby had not played really at all. Then it sounds like
no, she did gymnastics when she was little, and then didn't play any team sports. Had no interest in it until basketball, and now she's excited. To do some additional classes with you and, prepare herself for trying out at high school, wherever that ends up being.
Oh, that's great. So I guess you can take them one at a time or just both overall. But I like to ask, what has worked well for, both of them or for you as you've kind of seen them progress with basketball?
That's, a fairly loaded question, in the context of I could go any number of directions with this. I mean,
sure.
I think the greatest thing, I think for me personally, as well as probably for them, has been at least my ability to be involved at school. And by that, I mean, if they say, hey, can we get a group of friends together to go over to the gym? I can unlock it for them and take them to the gym.
Yeah.
So my ability to give them that outlet without everyone having to have a membership at the works or the rec center or this and that, or a hoops lab, no offense.
Sure.
Basically we've tried to make it accessible, and through that, it's garnered interest, like during winter break, for example, any given day, there was probably a dozen kids interested in going to the gym and playing.
Yeah.
That never happened before,
Sure.
That was just this year. So I think the accessibility, I mentioned sort of Colin with basketball, that learning curve. I think that's been exciting. I mean, like, for example, Abby had a couple games where we sort of put her in like the point guard position, These were games that, maybe we were blowing them out and we're like, okay, let's give some other people some opportunities to try something. She loved it. She loved bringing the ball up and looking for the players on the field. So just having opportunity to try different things while still feeling like there's a lot of new things to learn.
Sure.
I don't know if that quite answers the question, but I think the biggest thing has sort of been accessibility.
Yeah.
I think about it going back to like baseball. I mean, my son's played for years and I used to just take him over to whatever field we could find and throw hundreds of pitches to him, and he progressed quickly and he was excited about that. As opposed to, and this isn't to sort of disparage any of his friends or their parents, they may, not have the time or the availability to do things like that. So I'm fortunate in that I'm self-employed. So if my son's like, Dad, can we go to the gym at 3 PM? I'm sure, let's go.
Yeah.
So I can make those things happen while they're excited and still want to do things with Dad.
Yeah. So I'm hearing really that, you being a facilitator and having access to a gym was really all they needed to really get going.
Yeah. I mean, and then beyond that, and this isn't sort of, intending to pat you on the back, but I think that experience with Hoops Lab, I mean, I keep hearing it from parents, even at the end of the season, that those 4 weeks the girls spent at the beginning of the season were huge. One, got everyone excited. It got them in the mindset. And then we actually learned things too. I think there were things that you and the other coaches were able to facilitate that I didn't even conceive, and just ways of teaching things. It was huge. So, there's still folks that tell me that all the time. And I just facilitated, to use your word. I mean, I showed up and I stood there on the court and you guys did it. And I'm catching the glory for it. But, it really,
I think even
just
with
making it happen.
Yeah. Even with what you described, like, Abby being pulled in with a group of friends, I think that's often where kids get started. It's right. Like, I don't know anything about basketball, but all my friends are playing basketball. So like, I'll go along with it. And then, it turns out she really likes it. And, she found a role for herself.
Exactly.
So,
I mean,
without that group of friends and without access to a gym, like that doesn't happen. And,
totally.
You might be doing something completely different with your time.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I know after last year's basketball season, I think pretty much every day after that the girls were playing basketball out on the recess field, like that's what they did. It went from, standing around gossiping or doing whatnot to playing basketball. And, I've had girls come back to me and say, we asked our teacher, instead of doing study hall, could we go to the gym and practice for our game today, and things like, so they're just there's a level of psych that they all had, and it's contagious, Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So then the flip side to that question is, what has not worked well? What have you kind of seen as a struggle point? Obviously coming out of COVID, schools shut down, no gym access, and that year was a big hiccup.
Oh, but, that was.
You can speak about that, or anything else that comes to mind. Like, kind of what are the trouble points that you've seen with your kids along the path so far?
Well, I mean, that was the biggest challenge, I think, but we're not unique in that. And when you're looking at like middle school sports, in this case, I mean, most schools, with the exception of a couple, didn't play anything. So unless you had kids, like last year, we had a couple girls who did play like rec basketball and on a travel team, we just leaned heavy on them, and then they went and graduated. So this year, coming into it, everyone was really nervous. They're like, what are we going to do without the sisters that know what they're doing? And everyone stepped up. So, I mean, that was exciting. But I mean, really the biggest challenge, if I can point the finger at me for a moment, was just, tasked with helping them and trying to do that in a way that stuck, when you have all levels, you have one super competitive, person on the team, and then you're trying to coax a couple others off the bench to even join in the game. For me, coaching youth sports, at least in that regard, has been a challenge. So, I will say that I may not have always had the best approach to it, if that makes sense. Like it's been a learning curve for me. I think this year better than last year. But, trying to contain that excitement for, like, say, the handful of girls that are like, they want to play every minute of the game. And the other girls that are like, they're big and scary and they're pushing us around and they don't want, we don't want to get in the game. And, trying to balance that while keeping everyone interested in as part of a team, so some of that's been challenging for me. For the girls, I hope that just giving them the opportunity to get out and play has been huge for them. I think there's lots of skills to be learned. And, if they were to look back on the season as a whole, they'd have all sorts of critiques of what we could have done better, this and that. But, I can't really disparage any of them because they did awesome. Yeah. And I don't think that answers your question at all. But
no, I'm hearing the challenge you had. Really, the question was what has not worked, and having an 8th grade pair of sisters, it sounds like, that graduated and left a void. That's a big challenge for the team to overcome.
Yeah,
and I certainly, I saw and I've witnessed in the past with a lot of variety teams, that challenge of balancing. I've got 10 players, but 4 of them really love basketball. The other 6 are coming along for the ride and trying to develop and balancing.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely developing
skill, and how do you involve those 2 very different level players in practice together can be its own really big challenge. Trying to find constraints and design of practice drills and so forth, so that it's actually beneficial to both of those very different type of players is
right. And you're actually more eloquent about it because that was a huge one. I mean, as we were running practices, we're trying to get everybody involved, and you're often trying to take your aggressive players and pairing them with those that are not, hoping that might elevate some others, but really, you're struggling with, in some cases, intimidating. And, like your 5 starters who are all super into it, you want them to be practicing together, right. But then you end up with the B team that isn't even competitive with the A team. Right. So sometimes it definitely, there were challenges there in terms of trying to, run practices. And, I think the one thing that, and maybe every coach, every parent would hopefully say this, but I mean, we had an exceptionally good group of girls, on our team that, they were inclusive of everybody. Those that had a little bit more experience really tried to help bring along those that didn't. When we started the season, I was worried that, we might not have a starting 5. And then all of a sudden, I think the excitement from last year brought a bunch of girls into the team. So we ended up with 14 on the roster, which is way more than I wanted. Yeah. But 8 of those were 8th graders. So I was worried if I started cutting that the school might not even have a team next year, since we're going to be graduating over half the team. Sure. Yeah. And then, of course, we had injuries and, life happens. So it worked out, but it definitely was a challenge at times trying to incorporate, 13 girls into a practice, Yeah, that's a good one.
That can be very challenging. I've talked to a lot of players, I guess, and parents that have been involved in like the freshman level team or JV team where they have a roster of 15, legitimate players, and they're trying to rotate that. It's really just a recipe for disaster. Like nobody's happy. The coach is frustrated trying to sub everybody. Every player is looking at their playing time and wondering how they could play more, or why they aren't playing more. And it's tough.
Absolutely. And we were challenged a bit in that we had, and I don't think in middle school they go varsity JV, but that's sort of the nomenclature that I know. Right. We had a varsity team and really didn't have enough for a JV team. Right. And so the playing time was definitely an issue some games. Sure. And, you try and communicate that out to folks that, like this isn't rec ball. This is, preparing them for the next level. And, there's going to be some folks that play more than others, but everyone's an active participant, in practice, and they're gaining the same skills and practices. Right. But it's always a challenge with, folks that are complaining and this and that. So. But generally speaking, I mean, it all went really well in that regard. So
cool. And then let's speak just to Colin, because I know you haven't been directly coaching him. So what has worked for him from your perspective?
For him, as a young boy, it's just the ability to get out on the court and run. this year, his sixth grade class wasn't afforded the opportunity to try out for the varsity team, at school. So they had a core of, JV sixth graders that actually were really excited to play together. And if I look at sort of where they were last year to this year, I mean, that's exciting, the growth in the young players. If you take, say like a sophomore to a junior, there may not be huge, growth in there. I mean, obviously skills improve, right? But from like a fifth grader to a sixth grader could be a night and day difference. And, so for them, that's been exciting to watch. I think, again, to pat you guys on the back, I think getting down there to Hoops Lab and running drills together and having that structure was really helpful. I mean, similarly, when they get to practice at school, it's one coach sort of has his way of doing things, which is great. I mean, I think he's fantastic. But, like I learned in baseball, like when you have, 10 kids or 12 kids on a field, they all have to be doing something or you very quickly lose interest and whatnot. So, I think for them, basically getting that primer at the beginning of the season to say, hey, we're a team and this is how we want to work hard at these practices, as opposed to what I've seen from other sixth graders, sort of generally speaking, has been like a lot of goofing off.
Sure.
And like when I watched their team, there wasn't that. They were like, we're here to play ball, which is really exciting. So talking with the varsity coach, he was saying, yeah, I'm really concerned next year, we're not going to have much of a team. I said, well, you have to watch these JV boys sometime. You wouldn't be worried, and that's just because they weren't even afforded the opportunity to try out. So the varsity coaches never seen them, never met them. Sure. Whereas my son still, I mentioned I go over to the gym and play pickup games. It's kind of fun because he's now getting to a level that, he'll play pickup games with us.
Yeah.
So everyone is a little bit looser on the 11-year-old and let him get his shots off. But, he's just so excited to be out there playing, whatever it is. So getting on the court running is like the biggest thing that, helps him. And then beyond that, I mean, I think what he needs is just skill development, like shot selection and, keeping his head up, looking for passes, things like that, but,
I like to, I guess I'm countercultural. A lot of my thoughts on that is that, working on fundamental skills before you have that experience of just getting out and running and playing more basketball doesn't really work that well, right? We could tell Colin, like, go dribble the ball and stare at the wall in your garage until you become a better ball handler, but he's not going to want to do that. But those plays in basketball, like he's playing through his sixth and going into his seventh grade year. Now he's got the context where, anything we give him now is like, oh, I've seen that situation before. I now see this tool you're giving me as a solution to a problem I already know about.
Oh, absolutely. And he's like any other kid, these days he's just soaking up content on the internet. I mean, he'll watch some guy, some NBA star get his ankles broken by some dribble move. And next thing he's out there on the driveway trying to figure that out and then getting super frustrated when I swat it away from him. But, it doesn't happen twice,
learning all the time.
Exactly. And I think, whereas like my daughter is super excited for that team environment and being part of that team and contributing to that team, my son still has a little bit of like, I want to be the guy, so he's out there like pushing himself.
Yeah. You're not from him in our FIBA 3x3. Like he wants to be the man and take the shot.
Yeah. So, but he's out there working on it all the time. Whereas my daughter's like, well, who's going to come play with us? And if there's no one else, she's like, well, I'll go out and shoot a little bit and then I'm going to go in and do this other thing, so she's more balanced. Whereas my son is more like blinders are on and all I see is basketball.
Difference between boys and girls.
Generally speaking, I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but I think there's some truth there.
There is. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's a great perspective. Like just knowing, where your kids were when you started through COVID and, stepping up to the plate to coach yourself and, taking on the team to really provide and facilitate them being able to play and, fall in love with the sport. It sounds like over the last couple of years. It's great.
Yeah.
So I'd like to pivot now and kind of go back to, September of 2022.
Yeah.
You're heading toward the season, I guess your second season now, which I didn't really realize where that timeline was for you as a coach.
Yeah.
But I guess take me back there in your head. Like, where were you? Where was the team? And, what was your mindset like when you first kind of reached out for help about coaching the coach?
Yeah. Well, so, as I mentioned, I think the biggest thing was one, I recognized some deficiencies in sort of my own skill set working with the kids, from last year. We got through a season, we went to the playoffs, we had I think a good season, but in hindsight, there's a lot that could have been done different. Like we leaned really, really heavy on these two girls, which was probably unfair to them. But that's what we had. We had a bunch of other people that maybe were athletic, but had no experience playing basketball. So we leaned heavy on those that did. And then they graduated. And so looking at this year, everyone's super excited to come into the basketball season. And for example, I didn't even know if I had anyone that could dribble the ball, because we had two people that did it last year and everyone else is just like, where's Sophie? Where's Ava? And, they took passes, made passes, but no one else did much, in the sense of handling the ball. So I was concerned about that. I wanted us to have not a good season from the context of like wins, losses, but a good season in the context of having fun. And, having fun in some ways comes from performing well, but at least not feeling like you're, falling on your face out there. And so I wanted to do everything I could to help them succeed, the team. And part of that was a recognition that I need to learn how to teach some of this stuff better. So that's when I first reached out. And then, that conversation kind of morphed into some of the training that you do with teams, which, for me as someone like, I can watch a video, I can read something that's useful, but I need to get out there and do it. So, being able to stand out on the court with three of your play practice coaches and watch how things were being done was the best thing that I could have done selfishly for myself. In that context, our team being there, at least, I think we had 8 girls that were there. Yeah. They were almost props in my education, if that makes sense. Right. But, they gained a lot from it themselves. So, they may not have realized how much they're participating in that helped me going forward. So, I'm grateful to them for, and their parents for all being super willing to make that happen. Yeah. So that's sort of where I came into, is really just recognizing that like we've got potentially a bunch of holes, in terms of our team from what we were losing. But, I think through, I don't want to, say it was all you, but I think that getting started early and sort of everyone sort of recognizing where they were starting the season before we actually even started practices as a team helped us come into practices with a little bit more understanding of maybe the holes aren't so big. Maybe there's, we can make some things work, and, and it did. So. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you mentioned, the contrast of video versus, being on the court as being the most useful, but I'd like to hear your perspective. We sent you the 4 videos.
Oh yeah.
Our Confident Coach program to kind of prime your mind with at least the terminology and some of the concepts we're going to use, and, really giving you the guidelines of how we like to structure practice. So
right. Well,
I'd love to hear, what was the most useful, just kind of taking the video content standalone. Like if you hadn't been on the court, what would have stuck in your head the most from watching that video content?
Well, to back up a moment, the content you sent's fantastic. So, I viewed it, and maybe this was knowing that we're coming into the court, as a team, as sort of priming myself for what I should expect. Mm-hmm. I think, some of what play practice does, and down at the Hoops Lab that really resonate with me was sort of that, get out on the court and start playing basketball. One of the coaches I know, he wholeheartedly does not believe in scrimmaging at all, ever, never. For him, it's just a recipe for an injury. If we're going to get injured, it'll happen in a game. I more so believe in getting out there and play basketball to learn to play basketball. you know, and I don't know if there's a right or a wrong. It's just what I believe. And, you know, to an extent, that's sort of what I saw in sort of the play practice concept is we want to get out there and we want to start actually playing basketball, making modifications to things that we're doing on the fly. And it resonated with me. So, you know, the videos were fantastic in sort of seeing some of the progression of skills and drills and just general approach to, you know, doing some of these things and then taking that and then being able to get on the court, apply some of it or watch it really being applied, but then having the videos to go back to say, okay, I remember we did this, but I don't remember exactly how it all went. To be able to go back to it as reference material throughout, you know, particularly those first several weeks of our season, was super useful to me. So being able to basically have that library of content was huge.
Awesome.
You know, and you can look for things, you know, as you progress, like, you know, when we want to start incorporating, you know, like a 2-3 zone defense or, you know, emotion offense. And, you know, you can find YouTube videos. There's 101 people out there that are teaching this stuff online.
Right.
But to be able to see some of this content from, you know, general skills and drills, and then be able to interact with the creators of and ask them questions. I mean, for me is like, that's the way that I learned, you know? So like,
crazy enough, even coaches learn by doing.
Yeah.
You know what I've arrived at, you know, just like we wouldn't expect a player to read a book and go play basketball. They really learn by doing. You know, coaching is really very much the same. Like you got to get your feet on the court and really get into it to you know, to make that at least stick. You know, the theoretical knowledge is great, but kind of like you described already, the where the sneakers meet the court is where, you know, that really starts to make sense to you.
Absolutely.
So just going to the next progression you kind of already described, but the 4 weeks where we were on the court with the girls, you know, whether for yourself, like you already talked about a little bit, or for what you saw from the girls, like what was the most useful part of the on-court session?
I mean, I think, you know, I've sort of droned on and quite a bit about me. I think for the girls and what I heard from the girls, like it was really great for them to get out there and play together, even though I don't know, until it was like the fourth week that we actually did anything that was sort of like a 5-man team. But get out there on the court with each other and actually sort of start getting a sense for one, where each of them were. Cause I think everyone had the same, I don't want to call it reservations, but worries that I did in terms of like losing our 2 point guards. Like that was going to be, you know, really detrimental. And I think you could, I don't know if you recall, I mean, you work with lots of folks, like the first session, it was like chaos when you're like, okay, we're just going to do some 3-on-3. And it was just like balls flying everywhere. I mean, it was insane. But over those 4 weeks, I started, you know, thinking about sort of the passes and the cuts and the, you know, the dribbles and the steps and, you know, it started gelling a little bit more and you started seeing, you know, better quality passes, better quality shots, you know, more thoughtfulness on the court. And I think if anything, I think thoughtfulness would be probably what I would say, you know, yeah, there were lots of skills and all of that, but they started thinking more like basketball players. And I don't think that that's something that, you know, myself as a dad coach probably could have instilled in them, as opposed to 3 coaches at Hoops Lab. They're like, oh, these guys know their shit, you know, right. But you know what I mean? That like there was more gravity sort of in this, you know, it's like, oh, well, this is what BJ was talking about, or, you know, this is what Coach Kelly is talking about, you know, and getting it and getting sort of that in some cases positive, some cases negative feedback as they go through the drills. Sure. You know, and definitely you sort of talked about like challenges, you know, running practices with, you know, sort of being coached with 13 kids, you know, you may be on one side of the gym working on one thing and you've got a whole, you know, 8 people somewhere else. They could be doing it right. They could be doing it all wrong.
Right.
And it just is what it is right now. You're just like, are they busy? Good. Sure. And over here, we're trying to work on it. Whereas you had 3 coaches in there everybody was active and everybody was getting direct feedback.
Right.
So the learning that was going on there and it was just invaluable, to me. Like I couldn't possibly do that, so.
No, that's great. I appreciate all that feedback. Really the accelerated learning is really what I've come to see as the ultimate objective, like you just described, like get every player actively doing something with active feedback, instantaneously, where they're making adjustments and fixing things. Every repetition is adding something where they're progressing.
Yeah. I mean, it felt
hour on the court, we saw some big changes happen.
Yeah. I mean, it felt like 4 weeks of, like once a week, with you guys was probably equal to, from a learning perspective, like all of our practices rolled into one, or like all of our season practices, and they still may not have walked away with as much, because not only are you trying to work on some skills, but you're also trying to prepare for the next game. And you're trying to, coach these two people over here that probably won't even play in the game because they're too scared to, but you have to give them, you have to be helping them along too. And, it definitely, yeah, I mean, I couldn't have done it, So, in that context, I think they really benefited by having that direct feedback. And that's what prompted, to some extent towards the end of our season saying, hey, BJ, you want to come back?
Yeah.
And we had a whole host of things that were sort of our pressing issues. So, I thought everyone thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, well, that was actually the next question on my list was, kind of reframing now. We went through like 2 months, really, like November, December, early January, you reached out, and I want to kind of just take you back to that space where you were in January when you said, hey, I want you to come and watch a practice and try to troubleshoot some things. And we ended up doing what we now call our practice audit. You were one of the first test cases of that. Is like me coming to your gym, kind of see where things are, and then see what we could fix. So let's just start with where was your head at in January, and why did you need help, and what did you need help with?
Yeah, well, I mean, we could have continued on. Like we were having a reasonably successful season. I mean, we ultimately ended up getting knocked out of our semifinals, playoffs, but, which may have happened anyway. But, I think I wanted to, let me back up. There were still some hiccups in terms of running an offense. We were seeing some things, against us defensively that we didn't have great solutions for, that were becoming frustrating for the girls. And even post you being there, some of that still happened, but we went into our playoffs much more confident. So we needed to find some ways to address maybe a couple of offense strategy issues, defensive issues. And could we have kept doing exactly what we've been doing? Absolutely. But, I thought there would be value and a little bit of excitement, particularly for those 8 players that had participated, at the beginning of the season, to kind of come full circle. And, they didn't even know that you were coming. So that was kind of fun for them. They're like, oh, hey, I know that guy. Right. But it ended up, I don't know if I knew exactly what that time would be spent. I knew there were some things that I wanted to do, but it was a little bit more free form than maybe it could have been. Like if we had done practice at Hoops Lab, you guys would have been super structured. Like that just seems to be the way that you do it. And that's awesome. Like, I love it. Right. I'm a little bit less that. I might have 3 or 4 things that I want to accomplish. And I realized very quickly that, geez, that's like 3 practices trying to accomplish that. Right. It's like you bite off way more than you can chew. And I think to some extent we did that a little bit. But, I think the work that we did in terms of, like a 3, going from sort of the 4-1 motion offense to a bit of a 3-2 motion offense really helped the girls start moving the ball around a little bit better. Yeah. And I think just that basically spending 45 minutes just running through it, like they all got the concepts, from early on and then throughout the season. And then it just helps solidify it. So then and particularly also some of the defense pieces where everyone had been resistant, for example, to zone, which boggles my mind. But everyone had been resistant to it. Then all of a sudden we came out of there like, why have we been running man to man all year? Like, we're exhausted and we do better at this. The first game following that, I mean, we shut down the team. I mean, they didn't score 1 point from inside the paint. I mean, we killed them in that context. So, I mean, they all came out of that really excited. And then, of course, on the offensive side, the team that we were basically prepping for, they've been running sort of a similar zone defense to a switch to a man-to-man defense. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden they were back to like, what are we doing? But, we've been doing some of that all year. So, it basically broadened their quiver of, tools that they could bring to the game, which, I think to some extent, again, I mentioned sort of like the gravity or the gravitas that you and, play practice brings to the table. I can tend to push things, but my style tends to be a little bit more of, this is your team. I mean, if you guys are going to push back on this so hard, then okay, let's see how it goes. I'm definitely not someone like, we're doing this.
Right.
You were able to come in, show them the benefits of what I had already been trying to do. And all of a sudden we walked away and they're like, we want to do that.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think I'm always a big fan of the player input side of things,
Right.
Hey, I can suggest and make the case for why we want to do something, but like you said, like if this is your team, like the players really got to buy into that, as the conversation goes, in order for it to work. Because, coach on the sideline versus player with the ball in their hands, like if those two don't match up, then the player with the ball in their hands is probably going to make the decision for us.
Right.
And so, I really enjoy it, honestly. I don't get the opportunity very often to troubleshoot, a live team with, specific issues that need solving. And so I really enjoyed, walking in, just observing like how you guys were doing things at the time. Like,
I can definitely see it being, a challenge for some coaches. I mean, I see it all the time, mostly from, years being involved in baseball but a little bit even in basketball. I mean, it's stereotypical, youth sports coaches, right? I mean, we're like animals. But it becomes an ego thing. And like, for me, it was very easy to just say, it's not about me at all. It's about what's going to help them. Yeah. And I know that your experience and the experience that like Hoops Lab Play Practice brings to the table far outweighs my ego. So like I don't hesitate at all to ask. I mean, we've got one teacher at school that's coached and played a lot of basketball, and we're just like, hey, Connor, can you come in and help us with this? Sure. I don't hesitate at all. So I mean, if there's one thing that I can convey to other coaches, regardless of the sport, is just put your own ego aside and look for what's best for the team. It's not to say that you may not have it, but getting input from third parties can help you recognize what you didn't even know that you don't know. Sure. If that makes sense. And it's not trying to get on a soapbox there, but, there's definitely, I've had even folks say to me, it's like, why are you bringing in another coach? Aren't you the coach? It's like, well, I am. And I recognize that as a coach, I need help coaching my team for this. And then I can go back to doing our thing. But I mean, having that input. So at the beginning of the season and then coming back, not quite at the end of the season, was actually great in that, we're able to look at some things that weren't quite going well, troubleshoot them, as opposed to like standing there on the bench thinking like, I need them to do this and it's not happening. Why isn't it happening? It's like, well, I probably didn't teach it well. Right. One practice with you guys, and all of a sudden, like my biggest holdout, to doing some of these things was like, we should do that. It's like, that's why we did it.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome. I really enjoyed that, kind of two different scales. I would say we were very much focused on the individual skill side in the early, preseason time at the Hoops Lab. Like, we got to fix how we're making layups and where we're taking shots.
Oh, 100%.
Moving to get out of each other's way. And then, coming back to be like, okay, now it's zone offense, zone defense, like team strategy. How do we keep each other out of each other's way? It's really,
exactly.
Look at offense at the simplest form is like, how can we coordinate 5 players so that we're not running into each other and getting in each other's way when we're trying to score and attack and move. And,
exactly.
Getting a zone framework to move around, I think you were very focused on the defensive side, I think, up to that point. And so, for me to come like, all right, based on the defense you have, this is how we would use an offense to work around that and actually, produce some really good quality shots and opportunities and so forth.
And it did. I mean, it definitely, and honestly, one of the, to toot my daughter's horn for a moment. I mean, one of the first games, post that, she came back and had her highest scoring game and her most confidence. But it was just because all of a sudden we started moving the ball more, and she was able to get into places that, she hadn't been seeing the ball, but it was sort of her sweet spot. And other folks were having, I think for a couple of our girls that were, generally our high scorers, I think they were finding that like all of a sudden they were getting better shots, because instead of bumping into each other or, I mean, to some extent, like I said, we went from sort of this 4-1 to, a 3-2 from an offense perspective. And we kind of got to pull a player out that they were sort of bumping into, and they liked the 4-1 because they sort of kept everybody moving. But there was always like, oh, all of a sudden we're stacked heavy on one side. It's like being able to pull one person out of there really worked. And, some of these things were things that, it's like, I remember doing this, but I wasn't teaching it well, and all of a sudden it would be, well, if I do this, what do I do? And then you want to be like, think like a basketball player, like improvise. And all of a sudden, like, there is no improvise, like when you have a group of kids that are saying, well, tell me where to go. And then once they started doing it for like, that 45 minutes where there was things like, well, could I still set a screen? And you're like, absolutely, set a screen. Yeah. Like, oh, well, I thought I had to pass and cut. Like, well, yeah, I mean, that might be the framework, but you can improvise on it. And I think for them, that was huge, seeing that like, oh, well, this rigidity isn't quite there. I mean, I'm sort of running off onto a tangent here.
Oh, those are great. I mean, two really key words for me you just said was framework, which is always what I'm about. Like, get the scaffold in place. And then the second word was improvisation. Like, we get a scaffold based on universal principles of basketball, and then we unleash the players to improvise anywhere within that framework. You can do absolutely anything that leads us toward, aggressively attacking opportunity. And
I mean,
that's where teams really succeed and are a lot harder to defend because
I mean, simple things like if you're up here on the wing and you see an opportunity to cut in, don't be so focused on exactly like, oh, well, I need to be back here. It's like, well, just keep an eye on where the offense is moving and fill that hole, get back over there and then just reset and redo. And, everyone was so focused on like, well, I have to start in this spot. And then that means I have to go here and here. And, we've been trying to get away from that to some extent. And I know I'm getting into the weeds here a little bit, but I think it was just saying, being able to step back and say, well, no, it's a framework. And for a couple of people, you being there was an aha moment of like, oh, well, I can still do that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you can. Right. I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to set a screen. It's like, mixing up your speed on the court, to get open. If you always pass to the right and cut to the left, they know that. Or if you're a point guard and you can only drive to the right-hand side, like they learn that really quickly. You have to mix it up a little bit. So,
right. Yeah. Oh, that's great. I know we both got a constraint to jump off here in a second. I'd like to end with, I guess, kind of two-part question again, but just the advice you'd have to A, parents, or B, coaches based on, your experience so far. We call this podcast the Basketball Parent's Journey. So I always like to wrap up with, what would you say to a parent, maybe that has that fifth grader that Abby was and moving to, what you've experienced up till now, what can you tell parents that would give them some advice that might help them along their journey?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, the biggest things I've learned, one, through sort of this last couple of years of basketball experience, but just generally speaking, and this is years of being involved in like travel baseball and whatnot, is just, one, you got to get the kids access to it. So if it's basketball, I'm not saying you need to go out and buy a $1,800 hoop to put on your driveway, but find the park that you can go to, like make time for them to love the sport and make it fun, but also keep them involved in other things, like my son, for example, if all he did was play baseball, he probably would have burned out of it. But playing baseball and, then he was all into basketball, even while his winter baseball training was going on. And, it was like, well, okay, we won't get to baseball practice tonight because we've got this basketball thing going on. But once basketball's over, we'll get back to baseball. And, he's able to make that switch and not be so obsessed with one thing. But it's just the accessibility, and I know not all parents have the ability to, like I'm blessed in that, I can take my kid to the gym at 3 p.m, or, I can do this. But it could just be, get them access to playing ball, and I think in a team environment, if they're interested in pursuing like basketball, through school, is to get them playing, not just like on the playground. It doesn't have, they don't have to be groomed into being great basketball players, but give them the structured environment to play in. Because I've seen it now, especially even in middle school, when they start getting 7th and 8th grade, it's much more structured than what, the playground sports, so something like your FIBA, league, or this Ignition league that I think I've just learned about, get the kids playing. I mean, it's still kind of drop-in environment, but get them playing and get them in an environment where they're encouraged to, think for themselves, play as a team. And maybe, although I know you're not necessarily there to coach all the kids in these leagues, I know there's feedback that happens, that's just.
No, absolutely. I think that, that dynamic is really where the magic sauce is that, they're playing and building their context of what basketball looks like. And then we're giving them feedback like, hey, here's a tool that you could plug into what you just did and make it better. And
right. And then as a coach,
you start soaking that up and really start to accelerate their ability to play, faster, better, higher quality shots, like everything we want them to do. It's kind of a necessary environment in that it's, open, kind of low key, but still competitive enough to drive them to improve.
Right. And then, sort of my last moment here, just, as a coach, I think, and everyone's going to have a philosophy on it, but we sort of touched on it briefly. But I mean, my experience so far has been, if the kids are vested in sort of what they're doing, i.e. they get a say in it to some extent, then they're really going to care more, so like I approached every game of like, hey, I'd like us to do a zone defense to start. But if it's not working and you guys want to switch to like a man-to-man, I'm open to it. But let's try this to start, or whatever it may be. But give them a voice in it. And all of a sudden, at least I've found, they get really vested and excited. And particularly when something they didn't think was going to work does. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wow, like that actually worked. And then beyond that, ask for help, I'm not, I don't think I know everything, and I know that I don't. And, there are resources available, whether it's, if you're coaching at a school, every athletic director that I've talked to has been interested and willing to help. I mean, we started looking at scheduling some practices with a neighbor school. Our gym flooded, and, because of those relationships, one of our neighbor schools said, hey, come play your games at us. Just turn the lights off, when you're done. Build those relationships. It's not all about being that, tyrant coach that's, out to get the trophy. Nobody likes that person, So, I mean, that's, I think as a coach, you have to be a team player too. So
that's a great way to frame it.
That's my 2 cents.
Build relationships and ask for help where you need it. I think there's always room for collaboration as coaches where you can learn from each other in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And I think that, for the plug to Hoops Lab and play practice, I mean, I know my daughter's coming back in March for, some one-on-one courses. One of the girls on our team is down doing, I think, a group course with you. My son is looking at doing the Ignition league with 4 or 5 of his JV friends. So, just, our little microcosm has seen the value of getting out and doing this. And then what you guys are offering, there's definite appeal. I think even one of our girls, I don't know if it happened, but I know her father had contacted you guys because his son was playing for the first year in high school and he needed to get off the ground running, because he was a junior and had never played, competitive before, so I think people very quickly realized like, hey, there's a lot to be learned just in our little community here. So, and resources available. So thank you for offering that, not only to our team, but our families and so forth. So
thank you. You're really welcome. Thanks for spreading the word and bringing more people our way. It's been fun to see the progress. I look forward to having Colin and his squad come to the Ignition League. I think they're gonna bring some energy that the other guys.
I have no doubt. Be good. So, well, excellent. I do have to run, so thank you for this. I'm sure I'll be following up with a couple questions I have for you, but I've got to go pick up the boy at school.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. It's been a great.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.